What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This episode number 543. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources, and joining me on the line all the way from Denver, Colorado, it's Luis Scott-Vargas. No sandwiches this time, Luis?
I saved that for the special occasions.
A lot of people asking what were in the sandwiches. I had Luis as a guest on Outside Notes, the video series I'm doing for Wizards of the Coast. And you might be interested in it because it is about Ikoria Limited. Episode 3 actually went up today. I'll put a link in the show notes for it. And I told Luis, yeah, it's casual. Just, you don't need to do anything crazy. It's like just me calling you up or whatever. And I call up and he's humping on a sandwich and he goes, well, you wanted the casual thing, right? I'm like, I guess so. Now everybody wants to know what's in the sandwiches though.
It was a really simple sandwich. It was those little King's Hawaiian rolls with some pepper jack, avocado, and mayo, and that's it. Salt, pepper,
That sounds good.
Yeah, it was not bad.
This week on the show, we've got the Ultimatums episode, which is like a really sweet name, but really what we're doing is we're kind of following the track of the Ultimatums in the set as a way to use them as kind of like our signpost on commons in our set review, where they lead us down the path of these 3-color wedge decks that you can draft in the set. And we're going to be talking about those this week on the show. Before we get into the details of that, though, let's mention our sponsor channel, fireball.com. Good news from CFB, Luis.
Yeah, we are opening up on kind of a reduced capacity, so there may be some delays, but we're fulfilling orders, we're shipping stuff, and we'd love to have you back. This is a pretty big news for us, and we're taking a lot of precautions. We only have a couple people back in a very large warehouse, so I feel good about kind of where we're at with that. But definitely the biggest news is that we're buying cards, we're selling cards. So head on over to Channel Fireball. Use the store credit if you've got it. Just come on back.
That's great. Yeah, really great news, and great. You guys are doing it the right way, but just anything, being able to place orders and stuff is such a huge difference from when you're just completely shut down. And of course it matters to the employees and everything as well. So really great to hear that steps are being taken in that direction. And yeah, head on over to Channel Fireball. You're already there to watch the videos, and if you're on CFB Pro, but now you can resume transactions in the way of selling and or buying cards from there. So please do that. Also, the show's brought to you by Patreon. That's right. Patreon.com/limited resources is where you can find that. And I've been working hard on some bonus content, right? I've been mentioning it on the show, since we've all been kind of on lockdown. But, the role of content creators is as important as ever because people need it, right? You need a distraction. You need something to kind of take your mind off of things for a little while. And I've got 2 extra episodes coming. Probably both will drop this week. One of them is with Ryan Spain, and he did kind of a deep dive on some of the things that we're seeing from Ikoria Limited from a big picture perspective. So that'll be really interesting. And then I've got a special interview lined up with Chris Ko from Wizards of the Coast. He's the executive producer for Arena. So he's kind of a big shot over there on the Arena side of things. And he's going to come on the show to talk about human drafting and how that got implemented and answer questions about that. So that should be an interesting one as well. And you can look forward to those. And, those type of videos and being able to do that stuff is really possible because of everybody who supports the show on the Patreon. And I want to say thank you to everybody who does that. One of the things you get if you're a patron is you get to ask questions. And we've got a question from Tony who says, hello, sirs. I have a younger coworker who loves Commander, and we talk about it all the time. I want to get him into Limited, but if he's used to drawing 8 cards a turn and counterspelling everything, I don't know how to sell it. Any advice is much appreciated. I got a few things that come to mind off the top of my head, especially for a Commander player. One of the big draws for Commander and for any format that's 100-card singleton is variability of outcome, right? When you play a game of Commander, ideally it's not the exact same thing every time, right? You want to have your deck do different things at different times and show you different combos that you didn't even think of. And when you play against somebody else, you want to see different looks and different cards from them, not just the same exact thing happening every time. And that's the same thing in Limited. when you play limited, I mean, most limited decks are pretty close to being singleton. And with a wide range of cards available for the 2 or maybe 3 colors that you choose to play, you are going to have that cool experience where anything can happen and you don't really know. It's not super predictable on a game by game basis. And I think that that's where I would start for a Commander player to say, hey, look, there's some similarities here, even though the formats couldn't look more different on the surface. Anything come to mind for you, Luis?
I think that the variability of gameplay is really strong. Like, that's part of what's fun about Commander, I think. And it's the fact that you get to play with a really wide range of cards. And I can see a lot of people not wanting to play like standard as if they play Commander, but limited, I think, is actually in a lot of important ways closer. So yeah, I kind of like that idea.
Yeah. The one difference I think that you would have to, the hurdle here, I think, is that limited players tend to really enjoy trying to make the best of not a lot, right? Like, for example, we're trying to scrape together these commons and uncommons and stuff to try to make a cool, cohesive deck that does powerful things in the most consistent way we can and all that kind of stuff. But we're trying to make lemons out of lemonade, right? Where when you play Commander, every card you put in your deck, you have a huge pool of cards to choose from. You're picking the very best version of that card, and you're used to very big, powerful things happening a lot. Where in Limited, it's special, right? Like, if you get to do, one of the video clips I used on the outside notes this week saw one opponent who was down a lot cast an Eerie Ultimatum to get back like 10 creatures, and then the other opponent ripped the land they needed to cast Ruinous Ultimatum to wipe all of them off the board. Now, for a Commander player, they might be like, oh, that's pretty cool. But for Limited, it's like, oh my God, right? I mean, that's just like an absurd sequence.
I mean, I think that not surprisingly, Ikoria might be one of the more Commander friendly sets in the sense that, first of all, you've got Companions, which obviously has a parallel, but also the biggest difference between Limited and Commander is, the magnitude of flashy effects. But I actually think that, the Ikoria can deliver on some of that as well. Yeah,
totally. So I would pitch it that way to your friend Tony. And thanks for the question. We do appreciate it. All right, now we've got a Crack-a-Pack, but as we noted last week, it's kind of difficult to do Crack-a-Packs right now because we don't have the packs available to us. So what I did is I started a quick draft on Arena, which is the bot drafts now. And I opened up a pack, and we're going to take a look at that now. So pack one, pick one from the back here. I guess I'll go. So Swiftwater Cliffs is in our land slot. That's the gain land that is red and blue. And speaking of mana fixing, our next card is Farfinder.
Yeah, I like Farfinder. It's a little below what I would be like happy with as a first pick, but it's certainly not bad.
No, and it really does. It's a 3 mana 1/1 Vigilance, and when it ETBs, you search your library for a basic land and put it in your hand. The Vigilance ends up being nice too because it is an excellent target for Mutate as well. It helps you hit the land drop that you need for it, and then it's not a human. Next is Sudden Spinnerets. This is green for an instant. It's common. Target creature gets +1/+3 until end of turn. Put a reach counter on it. Untap it. I can see sideboarding this in.
This is actually a pretty high rate combat trick as far as they go. 1 mana for +1/+3 is pretty good. Plus an untap, plus permanent reach. So I don't feel bad when I have to play this card, but I don't think this is a format that particularly lends itself to combat tricks either, so clearly you're not going to want to take this one early.
Right. Your favorites next, Almighty Brushwag. That's the green 1/1. It's got trample, and you can pay 3 and a green to give it +3/+3 until end of turn.
I do like the Brushwag. It's worse than Farfinder for sure, but I do like the Brushwag.
Yeah. Do you like the art?
Yeah, the Brushwag art is pretty dope.
It's pretty good. Next is, oh no, Prickly Marmoset, 2 and a red for a 2/3 first strike monkey, and whenever you cycle a card, it gets +2/+0 until end of turn. Oh, the cycling deck, Luis. We're going to be talking about it for a while, man. I live in fear of it.
Yeah, I mean, the cycling deck is the best deck in the format. It is format warping. We've talked about it a lot. When you we said in the kind of the preamble to the show, if your opponent goes Mountain Cycle Memory Leak or Plain Cycle Frostveil Ambush, you usually feel like, oof, here we go again, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But
I've never felt so anxious about my opponent's first land drop in a format.
Yeah, I mean, and speaking to that, I do think that first picking a Prickly Marmoset is perfectly fine, and certainly that's the pick right now.
Definitely. Next, speaking of, is Memory Leak. This is the 2 and a black sorcery. Target opponent reveals their hand. You choose an on-land card from that player's graveyard or hand and exile it. But critically, it has cycling 1, so you can put it right into the red-white deck with Prickly Marmosets in it and stuff, and just play this happily. It's a good card.
I think that there is an argument to be made, depending on how you feel the metagame is shaking out at the current moment, that you can first pick a 1-mana cycler over a Farfinder. I don't think that's an unreasonable position to take.
Which is insane, but true. Yeah.
That said, I would take Prickly Marmoset over Memory Leak, because you'd rather just take the cycling payoff and cut that off. But yeah, I mean, this is definitely something you can do.
Yep. And you can see the warping effects here that, and Prickly Marmoset is a pretty good card in that deck. I mean, it really is a nice one, but it's not one of the premium payoffs even, and we're already kind of warping things. Next is Lurking Deadeye. That's 3 and a black, 4/2 flash. It's a human assassin, and when it enters the battlefield, destroy target creature that was dealt damage this turn. Again, this is a learning curve thing for the format where, whenever you see an attack that just doesn't add up or looks strange, where a creature is being ran into a bigger creature on your side for seemingly no good reason, it's usually a Lurking Deadeye if your opponent's playing black.
Yeah, Lurking Deadeye is a solid card. It's not one that I would be willing to first pick. I think it's behind Memory Leak here. It's funny that Marmoset is our current pick, but Memory Leak kind of the interesting line, where I think Memory Leak and Farfinder are close. If the format was if you think cycling's overdrafted, and I can't speak to the up-to-date, day by day, it seems like it changes. But if your confident cycling is not being cut really, really heavily, then I think trying to get the first person on the board, start cutting the 1-mana cyclers, it can keep other people out and you can reap those rewards.
Yeah, I'm curious to see if in a week or two that we see that happening, where people are moving in that hard. Next is Keep Safe. This is 1 and a blue for an instant. Counter target spell that targets a permanent you control and you draw a card. I'm not going to take it here, obviously, but I have seen it do decent things. If you happen to be in a scenario where you have a very powerful bomb, or you're doing a mutate thing where you've got 2 or 3 creatures mutated up, and you have the ability to keep safe available, it is a big swing. It blows out their removal spell, and you even draw a card off of it. But it's clunky. It's conditional. It's 2 mana. It often doesn't behoove you to wait 2 extra mana to start mutating onto something like that, or 2 extra mana to cast your bomb. That's multiple turns by the time you get up into the 5 and 6 drop range. So yeah, I think you can play it, but I haven't been super impressed by Keep Safe overall.
I mean, to strike at our theme for today, if you keep safe an ultimatum, that's that's a swing. like the Inspired Ultimatum or something.
Is there one that targets a permanent?
Yeah, Inspired Ultimatum does 5 damage to any target. So
no. Okay, I want to see that now.
That's the only one, actually. Now thinking about it, that's the only one. But yeah.
Okay, that'd be sweet though. But yeah, not the pick here. Next is Crustacean, which is 3 and a blue for a 1/6 flash crab. I haven't actually found a home for this at all.
No, I think this card is basically just crap.
Just crap. Yeah, sorry, Shelly. Light of Hope is next. It's white for an instant. Choose one. You gain 4 life. You destroy an enchantment, or you put a +1/+1 counter on target creature.
Despite its standard playability, I saw that some Jeskai Fires decks were main decking this one. Mm-hmm. Yes, you clearly don't want to be taking this card here.
No. Next is an interesting one. It's Drannith Healer. This is our last common. It's the 1 and a white 2/2. And whenever you cycle another card, you gain a life, and it has cycling 1.
Yeah, Drannith Healer is very good, and certainly better than Memory Leak when it comes to cycling. But Prickly Marmoset is better for that purpose. Like that's where you'd rather be.
Yeah, the thing with Drannith Healer is that it covers both bases, right? It's like obscene that it also happens to have cycling 1 on it,
Drannith Stinger's the real big money there, because the Stinger's the super dangerous one. But yeah, Drannith Healer's obviously great. You'll play as many of those as you can.
Yep. Now our uncommons. First one is Raugrin Crystal, which is 3 mana for an artifact, and it taps for blue, red, or white, and it also has cycling of 2. These have been okay for me. I think you can play crystals pretty freely, especially in the type of decks we're going to talk about.
Yeah, they're they don't feel great when you cast or cycle them, but they are fine cards.
Yep, agreed. They're fine cards. Fixing plus ramp is good, and the ability to draw one late and not have it be a complete liability is enough to make it in the deck. Next is Trumpeting Gnar. This is a good one. It's 1 blue-green for a 3/3 beast, and it has mutate for 3 blue-blue, 3 green-green, or 3 green-blue. You can choose. And whenever it mutates, you get a 3/3 beast token.
Yeah, I like Trumpeting Gnar a lot. It's actually one of the better ways to just turn 3 you cast this, turn 4 you mutate onto it. Is I think one of the stronger sequences with this. But yeah, I like Trumpeting Gnar quite a bit.
Same.
I would take it over. I would probably take Marmoset over Trumpeting Gnar this instant, but I could see either pick being right. And I would like to live in a world where Trumpeting Gnar is a little better, but the cycling deck is good enough that I think you're supposed to take Marmoset over Trumpeting Gnar right now.
Yeah, which feels off, because Trumpeting Gnar is like a gold uncommon, like it's a sweet card, and Prickly Marmoset is a riff on cards that they put in sets all the time, ones that get a temporary power bump, but they happen to throw First Strike on it, and they happen to put it in a set where 80% of your deck can have cycling or whatever. Oops.
I mean, plus 2/0 is just such a big number.
It is.
With cycling 1 being around,
Yeah, and First Strike is just obscene, right? I mean, think about the other iterations that we get of this, right? They don't usually have First Strike. So normally they're very threatening, but they need a little help to get through. Like you want to give them flying or you want to give them unblockable, and then you can get in for a bunch. But this one just has it all built in. Last uncommon, I should say, is Duskfang Mentor. This is 2 and a black for a 1/3. It's a human cleric. When it enters the battlefield, you put a lifelink counter on target non-human creature you control, and you can pay 1 and a black and tap it to put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control with lifelink. These cards have all been medium for me. They're playable, they're fine, but I never prioritize them. And if I don't have one in my deck, I'm like, whatever, I don't really care. That said, when I do have them, when I do have them, I'm like, okay, sure. Like it's a place I can put mana and get a counter on a creature or maybe 2 repeatedly, and that has just enough utility. But yeah, I have not been overly impressed by the mentors. For sure.
No, like you said, the mentors are fine. They offer a decent effect, but in the reality of the situation is there's very, very few games where you just sit there and you get to use your mentors over and over again.
Exactly.
That's just not really how the games play out.
Right. And against the slower decks, they can just do so much more powerful stuff. There's tons of card draw in this set. There's no lack of resources, and they can just go over the top of like, hey, look at this. I'm going to spend this mana and tap one of my creatures to get a counter or 2. And they're just like, yeah, play a 6-drop, mutate a thing. And you just feel overwhelmed. And then if you go up against the sleeker decks in the format, like the cycling deck, then this is just too slow. Our last card, and it's our rare, is Hunted Nightmare. This is 1 black for a 4/5 menace creature. It's a regular rare, but when you see that, your alarm bell should be going off on the vanilla test that you don't get a 4/5 menace for 3 mana without paying some costs here. And you do. It says when Hunted Nightmare enters the battlefield, target opponent puts a death touch counter on a creature they control.
Yeah. So the idea here is that, first of all, it has menace, so it can force a double block and trade for the death touch creature plus something else. And I think second of all that you can just kill whatever it is gets menace.
Yes.
But
gets death touch.
Or that's what I meant. It's a good card. Hunted Nightmare is a good card. You should always play it in your black decks. It's worth picking highly. It's worse than Prickly Marmoset. Is it worse than Farfinder or Memory Leak? No, I'd probably just take the Hunted Menace at that point. I think the card does, or Hunted Nightmare, that card does some good work, but I would still take Marmoset over it. I would take Snare Tactician over it. That's just where we are right now.
It's just where the format is.
The cycling deck doesn't always work out, but you're not paying much when you first pick a Marmoset or a Snare Tactician, because these cards are pretty strong even with like a light amount of cycling.
Right.
And when it does work out, it's just so unbelievably good that it's often worth the risk. The question is, at what point are you supposed to switch? At what point are you supposed to not first pick Dranith Stinger over, like, when you're contemplating, well, is it better to take Snare Tactician or Blood Curdle? Like that shows you how powerful this is. But I think for the most part, you're going to end up in a spot where you should start by taking the cycling cards, and if it turns out that the deck isn't open, be aware of that. Don't just just be randomly taking, sticking to your guns way too late. But it's not the sort of deck that you have that bad of a fail case when you're taking these solid cards. You can just pivot.
Right.
Wait, when you first pick Memory Leak over like Rumbling Rockslide, you're giving yourself fewer opportunities to pivot. I will say that, but for the most part, I think you're fine to start out in cycling until proven that it's not open.
Yeah, and one other point on the Hunted Nightmare: if your opponent doesn't have a creature,
it's just
no
complete
cost. Yeah, so pretty cool. But yeah, I think that doing cracker packs like this really, really highlights where the format's at in a very big way, right? And this is a cycling-centric format at the moment. And I think we're all kind of holding our breath and waiting for the big correction to come in. And that's one of the things that we're going to talk about with Ryan Spain on that bonus episode. But like, boy, they went hard on the number of, 1 and 2 mana cycling cards in the set, where I think if you get the minimum number of payoffs to make the cycling deck worth it, then I don't think that there's many scenarios where you're not going to pick up the 1 mana cyclers. There's just and the 1 mana being the priority, but enough cycling cards to at least have a functional deck. And if, somehow you're one of only 2 people at the table, you're just going to have the nuts, and your opponents are going to have to pay the price. Okay, let's get into these. So we're going to be talking about some of the trios, these wedges, as we call them. There's shards and wedges. And what is it? It has to do with like whether they're paired with their enemies or paired with their...
Yeah, the wedges are enemies. So like Temur is blue paired with red and green, with red and green being the enemy colors. So shards were like from Shards of Alara. So those are like Jund, Bant, Grixis, Naya, and Esper. And then the wedges are the ones that are kind of featured in Ikoria, which are Temur, Abzan, Mardu, Jeskai, and Sultai.
Yeah. And, these lead to the coolest combos. My favorite, when people ask me what my favorite color in Magic is, I'll say blue. But the true answer is Sultai is what is the thing, or the things that I want to be doing when I play Magic for the most part. And it's cool because since they are enemy colors, they add a lot to each other, right? It's not like 3 complementary things kind of adding up. It's more like very different things all coming together to make something better. And the cool part is that in this set, you can draft these things. Like there are numerous sets, right? The average set would not lend itself to being able to draft, a full on 3-color deck, let's say even capable of casting an ultimatum in its colors, which will have 3 of one color and then 2 of the other 2 colors for a total of 7 mana pips, with none of them being generic mana. Normally in limited, we just go, nah, dude, like you're not going to get away with that, but you can here. And one thing we should mention before we get into the individuals is a lot of this is predicated on the very good mana fixing in the set. Now, green has a good amount, which we'll talk about in a minute, but even at colorless, they went nuts, right? There's Farfinder, and then at rare triumphs, and then at uncommon crystals, and then there's the full cycle of gain lands plus evolving wilds at common in the set. So this has to be one of the more pushed sets as far as mana fixing goes that we've had in a while, right? That's so much.
Yeah, when the Ultimatums first came out in Shards, I remember loving first picking Cruel Ultimatum, but honestly, it was pretty hard to cast these cards. Mm-hmm. Whereas I've had multiple decks in this format where I have multiple Ultimatums and haven't found it particularly difficult. They did not go light on the mana fixing. Like the mana fixing is generous.
It really is. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been very cool kind of seeing how that's all worked out.
Yeah, and it's interesting because when we've been talking about cycling, right, I feel like this set maybe hit that too much of a good thing, right? Like, because generally I really like cycling and I like what it does to the games of Magic, but boy, there's so much of it in this set that I wonder if they push that a little too far. Where interestingly, when they push mana fixing really hard like this and they put all the gain lands in plus tri-lands at a higher rarity, and then they're like, you know what, we need evolving wilds. Like, let's throw that in there.
and Farfinder and Crystals and Fertilid and Humble Naturalist, and Migratory Path. Like like I said, there's just no shortage of these things.
Right. But the thing that I think is in my head, I'm like, I'm good with that. I don't know. Like I haven't seen a level of fixing that they hit where I'm going like, okay, this is stupid, or like, I just don't ever need to worry about mana anymore. And then that makes it a little less, a little less tension or whatever. I never hit that moment. I don't know. Maybe it's just something that I want every once in a while, but I feel like I just like having more fixing than not, in general.
I mean, getting to cast your spells is cool, and getting to play with like all these different colors with the cards is pretty cool too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And they do make you pay, right? I mean, you have to use picks on them, and a lot of these are slow, like tap lands and stuff like that. The first one we want to talk about though is Sultai. That's my favorite one. The ultimatum for it, by the way, is Emergent Ultimatum, which is black, black, green, 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 blue, blue. And it's a sorcery that says search your library for up to 3 monocolored cards with different names and exile them. An opponent chooses one of them. Shuffle that card back into your library, and then you may cast the other cards without paying their mana costs, and then you exile the ultimatum. It is very powerful, and I would always run it if I thought I had a good chance of casting it. But some of the other ultimatums are more just go bigger.
Yeah. So Emergent Ultimatum relies on a couple things. It relies on you having good monocolored cards, and it relies on you having enough of a density because. Sure, sometimes you ultimatum on turn 6 because everything lines up correctly. Mm-hmm. Most of the time what's going to happen is you're going to ultimatum around 9 or so, because you need to hit 7 mana sources. You need them also to be all the right ones. Like you kind of – it takes a little bit to kind of get there. But once you do, they have a pretty powerful effect. Emergent Ultimatum is one of the ones where if you cast it with 15 cards left in your deck or 20 cards left in your deck, you don't want it to be where if you draw 2 good – monocolored cards, then all of a sudden Emergent Ultimatum is kind of dead, right? There's going to be some decks where it's gonna not be great. What I really do like it with is cycling. So when you get to go get like Titanoth Rex, the 11/11 trampler that cycles, a Greater Sandworm, and like a Blood Curdle, like you're feeling pretty good about how that's going to come out.
Yeah,
and that's near like one of the optimal cases, but it's still not that hard to imagine, even with just commons. Greater Sandworm, Blood Curdle, and you could, some other just like kind of like a Honey Mammoth, and that's pretty solid. You're going to get at the minimum 10 mana for 7 mana and a 2 for 1, and these cards also help catch you back up.
Exactly. And so as long as you have those, because again, they do have to be monocolored. So it's a little tricky because you might think I'll just go get the best cards in my deck, but it doesn't quite work that way, which is part of the reason why if I didn't think my mana was really good, I could see not running Emergent Ultimatum. Where some of the others, Ruinous Ultimatum, I would run that even if I thought my mana was a little sketchier because the payoff is just win the game. Yeah. At any rate, this is primarily this is the best mana that you can get in the format, I think, because you do get to play green as your primary color for the most part. So you get all that mana fixing that we mentioned, plus Migratory Greathorn, Fertilid, and Migration Path. So your mana is not an issue. It's just not in the index like this. You can get it. The actual issue is where do you spend it, and how, do you have mana sinks, or do you have card draw or expensive things to do with it once you get to that point? Because this does play out like a ramp deck. Sub-theme, mutate. Yeah. I mean, these colors have good mutate cards in them. And again, this is where Migratory Greathorn can come in to be both a mutate and also a ramp and fixing enabler for you. So that's a good thing. And it comes down early enough to actually be able to do that. So that's good. And then really any of the powerful value mutate creatures you can play, and you do want to, and that's across all 3 colors. I kind of tried to set the bar in the set review it. Do I feel like if I mutate this, am I getting a card back? Right. And it's turned out throughout the course of the format that wasn't the bar, full stop. Right. There's some of these that you do get a card back and you feel like you're behind if your creature gets killed because you can just fall behind, the cycling deck or a more assertive deck. So I wouldn't put that as the end all be all, but that is at least the minimum, is that, I do want that if I'm going to go for a mutate, that I want it to be getting me value and hopefully on board, like a Starix or something where, I'm affecting the board and perhaps getting more permanence on the battlefield that can help me attack, block, or stay alive or whatever. But this does open the door to basically any of them. So if you see a powerful mutate card, you can feel good about taking it. This color trio also is not particularly heavy on humans. So many of the creatures that you want to run anyway, like Farfinder and that kind of thing, end up being mutate targets as well. So that's a good thing.
You've also got the Reanimator like sub theme of back for more and Unbreakable Bond plus Greater Sandworm, Titanoth, and Void Beckoner, like all these really expensive cycling creatures where you have reanimate spells, which is nice too because that also helps. Like we're using the ultimatums as kind of the headline of the episode. These decks don't actually require them, but it is nice because early, if you cast Emergent Ultimatum earlier, you can go get your Sandworm or Titanoth, and if you've drawn the card later, you can just go get a reanimation spell like Unbreakable Bond. You can't actually get back for more, sadly, but you can get Unbreakable Bond, and it's kind of a proxy for whatever your biggest creature is.
Right, and your opponent's left with really no realistic options at that point. And I really like that. I think that they did a beautiful job of sort of sneaking this reanimation sub-theme in, because it's not like you're drafting the Reanimator deck, but if the two cards come up where you cycle off your Titanith Rex and then, you get your Unbreakable Bond or you're back for more, bingo, right? You've got a really powerful, cool combo that didn't really cost you either, right? Especially when you're cycling these cards into your yard. And then you can use cards like Excavation Mole and Skull Prophet to help you get cards into the yard without costing you actual cards also, just as better as other ways to do that. And I think that that's a really cool one. And then, of course, since you are playing black, you do get really great removal. Blood Curdle, Heartless Act are kind of the headliners, but they're in different rarities. You can play Deadweight, though, as we mentioned before, this is not the format where Deadweight is like a first pick. I have it closer to like Shock, right? Where it's like, it's good for killing small creatures and making sure that you don't die. And it has the bonus over Shock of shrinking down bigger creatures. But the last time, some of the last few times we've seen it, at least, were formats that were like Morph, right? Where all of a sudden, Deadweight overperforms in formats where you're going to have so many targets for it that are high value targets. And here that's not quite the case. Also, the Marmoset's a 2/3. Come on. Come on, dude. Yeah. Did you really need to make that a 2/3?
Snare Tactician 2.
Right. And Snare Tactician. At least you can kill the stupid Stinger, but come on.
Yeah.
Anyway, and so keep that in mind with Deadweight, but you do get access to these very good removal spells, and you do need to prioritize them. Look, we always need to prioritize removal in limited. That's not new, but both Heartless Act and Blood Curdle are splashable for other decks, and with Farfinders and stuff floating around, they are going to get snatched up and splashed quite freely. So really make sure that you do prioritize Blood Curdle, because you need a few of those to make this deck really good. And then do that. One other thing, that I wanted to mention was, card draw with blue and also even black in this format with, Bargain. You get a lot of card draw, and you do want some, because if you spend a few turns setting up your mana with, Migration Path or Migratory Greathorn or even a Fertilid, you do need to be able to reload at some point. And you'll have a ton of mana available, and there's nothing better in the game than the feeling of having 8 or 9 mana of all your colors and then cold ripping Dark Bargain or whatever. You're like, yes. Oh, yeah. So you want to make sure you put a couple of those in there as well. I'd say about 2 card draw spells is right. Last thing is blue. Blue is third place in the deck. I do view this as a primarily green and black deck, but you absolutely get to play the powerful and efficient stuff that you'll see from blue. You don't need to be shy about it. It's just the deck really runs off of ramp and removal, and you need big stuff to do at the top, which green tends to have good as well. But if you find good blue payoffs, grab them. Play them. What is the stupid one what is the 7 mana one that you get for 6 and it taps stuff down? I always forget the name. Then again, I don't know any of the names of the cards apparently, but.
The 7 mana, which one?
Blue, not Morph, Mutate guy.
Oh, Archipelagore, yes.
Yeah, Archipelagore.
Archipelagore is a great splash. I agree. This is mostly a black-green deck splashing like Dreamtail Heron.
Yep.
Archipelagore is another good one. And basically looking for blue to shore up like good mutate targets and maybe some card draw.
Right. So anyway, that's what you want to do with that, and it is super fun. Ramp, do big stuff. That's one of the most fun things to do in limited.
Yeah, and it's the kind of deck that kind of Sultai often bridges to other colors too. Like most commonly I've found is when I'm black-green mutate with Humble Naturalist, Farfinder, maybe a land splashing like an off-color, like an Everquill Phoenix type deal, like just some kind of off-color mutator that's single pip.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. You want to actually? I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Do you consider yourself more of a humble naturalist or an insatiable hemophage?
I would say I'm more of a humble naturalist. I think
most really? Interesting. I'm curious to see what our thoughts from our listeners are on that. All right, let's move on to the next one, which is Jeskai.
Yeah, so Jeskai is more of it's a control deck. Most commonly, Jeskai is kind of the traditional spells matter deck. So you're talking, removal spell, card draw. Not if you're full on Jeskai, you tend not to be that aggressive. Whirlwind of Thought, for example, the Jeskai enchantment that says when you play a non-creature spell, draw a card. Like this is what you're trying to do. Mm-hmm. The Inspired Ultimatum is actually a really strong build around for this deck because it does everything you want to do, which is kill one of their things, draw a bunch of cards, give you some life, so you have enough time to play with your toys. And I found that Jeskai can work out really nicely because it naturally has the kind of cards that prolong the game. It's really helpful. There's a reason Fire Prophecy is just one of the best commons. Is This helps fix your mana as well as killing one of their things, and you'll take a card like Spell Eater Wolverine or Sprite Dragon, these kind of aggressive spells matter cards because the rate on them is really good, but you tend not to be an actual aggressive deck. This is the kind of deck that uses Pacifism, Essence Scatter, Capture Sphere, Fire Prophecy, Rumbling Rockslide, just kill all their stuff. Use various ways to draw cards, whether that's like Boon of the Wishgiver, a 6-mana one, of one mind, which you can even sometimes cast for 1 mana if you've got the right kind of like mix of creatures. And you do need a big finishers. The Ultimatum is actually the perfect one. Ominous Seas can be good. This is the color combination I've decked myself with the most. Like you can definitely end up, especially Ominous Seas and Ultimatum actually both can deck you. They can both end up in a spot where like I have 9 cards left in my deck. My Octopus is going to get 1 attack, like that sort of thing. And this is also a deck that uses a combination of card draw to draw its fixing, and then has to kind of aggressively pick Farfinder and tap lands. The green decks can be a little lighter on those because they have more replacements, like the Great Horn and Fertilid, Migratory Path, etc. Humble Naturalist. Right. The Jeskai deck doesn't. So this is the deck where you're gonna be forced to pick Farfinder over Rumbling Rockslide late in the draft, just because you need the appropriate fixing.
Should we read the ultimatum, by the way, since this is the ultimate ultimatum show?
Sure. So Inspired Ultimatum, it says target player gains 5 life. Inspired Ultimatum deals 5 damage to any target. Then you draw 5 cards. So
5 cards.
You gain 5, draw 5, and you usually kill one of their biggest creatures. Sometimes you can go to the face too.
Yeah, and that's triple red. Double white, double blue.
Red, double blue, double white. So again, it's whichever are the enemy colors. So your red is enemy with blue and white. So that's why it's like kind of the focus there. Mm-hmm. And this deck can also overlap with the cycling deck. So what'll happen is, obviously Ominous Seas is a cycling payoff, but you can end up with Snare Tactician and Marmoset and still kind of have like 8-ish cycling cards and still feel like those cards are decent, especially since this is one of the more defensive Marmoset decks where they don't need to know you have no cyclers. If you just leave a Marmoset back, are they going to attack you with 2/3/3s?
It's very difficult. Very difficult to attack in, yeah.
So this deck does end up frequently getting to kind of have. This is the deck where I end up when cycling doesn't pan out. When I first pick, cycling cards or cycling payoffs, but I'm just not getting enough cycling. I'll end up. You can kind of pivot into Jeskai control, and the deck's pretty sweet. The Inspired Ultimatum is one of the better ultimatums. I guess we should have ranked them first, maybe, but certainly Ruinous is the best.
Yeah.
I would say Ruinous, then Eerie, then Inspired, but Eerie and Inspired are very close, and Ruinous is, I think, just a very clear winner. And then Genesis and Emergent are a 4th and 5th, kind of in some order too. Probably Emergent is 5th, despite your love for Sultai.
Yeah, I think Emergent is the worst of them. And I think that Ruinous and Eerie are clearly the top 2. Like they have the most immediate board impact. Inspired's my favorite.
Eerie takes a little bit more work than Inspired, whereas Inspired just asks, put this in my deck and be able to cast it, which I guess intrinsically is some work. Eerie, you have to do more work, but I agree that Eerie has the best payoff of all of them minus the Ruinous.
Right. But Inspired's my favorite because you know exactly what you're getting. It is very difficult to die the turn after you cast Inspired Ultimatum. You get to kill the thing and gain 5 life. So, you know, what kind of board state did they have where that wasn't enough? And then you get to untap the next turn with, you know, at least 8 mana probably and 5 extra cards in hand. And that's the best. I love that.
Yeah.
Okay.
In general, Jeskai can also be blue-red, splash-white, but this is one of the decks that can really be any combination of these. Whereas like Sultai is mostly black-green, splash-blue, Jeskai can be really any, you know, it just depends. Are you seeing more Fire Prophecies or Pacifisms or like Frostlink / Essence Scatters? Like what are you seeing more of? And if you see a lot of blue and red cards and not very many white cards, sometimes you'll just splash white or you just be straight blue, red, whatever. But specifically for Jeskai, you can really be in any proportion. I don't know what the most common is. I think it's probably like blue red is probably the most common to have the emphasis where you're blue red splash white. But I've done it every direction. And if you have more cycling, sometimes you're red, white, splashing blue. And sometimes you're like kind of more blue, white control, splashing a Fire Prophecy and Rumbling Rock Slide, that sort of thing.
Right. All right.
So Mardu has the best ultimatum. Ruinous Ultimatum is certainly the best one. This is white, 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 black, black, red, red. Destroy all your opponent's non-land permanents.
Yeah, it is obscene, right? I mean, this is kind of the dream. Just blow up everything that your opponent's done. And particularly for limited where, you know, the board state is so important, like every game, this just says wipe out everything you've got, no matter what it is. This is, you know, raw power level, kind of the dream for a limited player. This is exactly what you always want is Ruinous Ultimatum. The question is, can you cast it? And as we've seen, you can. So what about the rest of the deck?
So Mardu can go a couple different directions. If you start with a Ruinous Ultimatum, you're generally incentivized and you will end up as just a red, black, white control deck, which sounds bad, but in this format, there's a lot of good removal spells, and then stuff like Cathartic Reunion, Fire Prophecy, and Cycling can kind of give you a little bit more consistency. Right. Dark Bargain, really good here as well. If you have enough cheap interaction, like Deadweight, Fire Prophecy, that sort of thing, Pacifism, casting Dark Bargain when you're at 16 and the board is clear, just feels really good.
Yes.
Crystals are good here, as are Farfinder and Taplands. Again, you're trying to cast Ultimatum if you're lucky enough to have it. And that's the most common reason I find myself in Mardu control, by the way. It also has the cycling aspect, because any red-white deck does, where cycling also plays particularly well with Ruinous Ultimatum. It might not sound like it does, but when you've got a bunch of cyclers in your deck, you can just rip through your deck and find the ultimatum. Like you just draw it more often when you have a 32 card deck instead of a 40 card deck.
Yeah, it also throws the mana ratio in favor of lands. And when you're trying to cast a Ruinous Ultimatum as soon as possible, hitting your land drops every turn is actually a good thing. So it works in both ways. Yeah.
And then you also end up in this deck more often having weird loops like like Rooting Moloch into Rooting Moloch, like that sort of thing. Like, look, if they're not going to give you card advantage, you got to build your own card advantage. And Rooting Moloch is, I think, at its best in Mardu, because Mardu doesn't have as many options for card advantage, has a bunch of removal spells, and how does it capitalize on them? This is the deck that's like most likely to go like cycle Memory Leak or cast it on turn 3, turn 5, cast Rooting Moloch, recast Memory Leak, you know, that sort of thing. So you're really leaning into that. In general, like as far as key commons, Fire Prophecy, Blood Curdle are the highest. Pacifism as well, depending on which direction your colors are going. Again, you got to take Farfinder and Taplands pretty early if you're trying to cast these ultimatums. And then you have the option of white-black humans, red-black sacrifice, or some combination where you're not fully focused as often, but you can have some of the key cards that make these decks work, and then just kind of combine them in some unholy mashup where, you know, maybe you've got enough humans that mutual destruction's good enough, and because you're playing the mutual destruction, maybe you get one, you know, tentative connection, one threaten in there. because you've got a few ways to work with that. So it can kind of be a grab bag there. I'd say the most common Mardu deck is if I get Ruinous Ultimatum and a Mardu control with like a cycling sub theme, and that deck I think ends up being pretty good. Oh, one thing to note for kind of all of these is there's also certain companions that play really well in these decks. Mm-hmm. Not that companions don't play well everywhere, but these are it actually works out kind of nicely where stuff, like Zerda or Luris plays well in Mardu. Mm-hmm. Just it's not surprised that the companions kind of line up with their color identities, and or Giganta plays well in every single one. But like Lutri plays really well in Jeskai and that sort of thing. So something to keep an eye on depending on what you open.
Yeah, hopefully you get a Ruinous Ultimatum and a Sweet Companion. The focal point that I wanted to hit on that you mentioned at the beginning is how good the removal is, and that's why this ends up being a more controlling deck. But it's kind of obvious, right? This is red, black, and white. These are the three colors that get really good removal, right? Blue and green are the ones that usually struggle. They've made sure that they had something to work with over the recent memory. But even then, you would not put the removal of any of the other colors versus the removal of these colors, right? They cover all your bases. You have, more unconditional stuff like Pacifism and Blood Curdle and cheaper stuff like Fire Prophecy to keep yourself alive. And you get access to all of it with this archetype.
Yeah, and I this deck is fun because you don't usually get to play non-blue control decks at this level, and Mardu is actually just really good. Mm-hmm. Like Dark Bargain goes a long way. Cathartic Reunion, Fire Prophecy go a long way to, because usually like the black-red control strategy isn't like the best. It can be okay. In this deck in particular, I think it works out nicely. Yeah.
What about Temur?
So Temur is mostly blue-green. So this is the red-blue-green wedge. It plays like blue-green mutate is its kind of primary focus. So Genesis Ultimatum is blue, 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 red, red, green, green. Reveal the top 5 cards of your library. Put any of the permanents into play and the rest in your hand. So, it's actually even look. So they don't even get to see. But you look at your top 5, throw all the permanents into play, put the rest in your hand. So it's a draw 5 at the very least, and it casts all the permanents. Yep. You don't have to either. You can, if there was a permanent with mutate, for example, you would often want to just put it into your hand if you're not getting too far behind on board. And the Ultimatum is not the headliner here. Like Ruinous Ultimatum is the headliner for Mardu, and Inspired Ultimatum is often the headliner for Jeskai. Those are the reasons you're in those colors. Genesis Ultimatum is more cute than that. I haven't actually found this one to be great because it's a card draw spell, and sure it helps you on the board, but it doesn't do anything intrinsically great by itself. Kind of the problem with Emergent Ultimatum, right? Where it's relying on there being good cards in your deck, whereas Ruinous Ultimatum and Inspired Ultimatum are the good cards in your deck. They don't need help. They just need to be cast.
Exactly.
Genesis Ultimatum, if your deck sucks, Genesis Ultimatum isn't going to make it not suck even when you cast it.
Right. And that's a really great way to put that those are the payoffs where this relies on you having other payoffs. And Genesis Ultimatum's even more narrow because they have to be in the top 5 of your library. And when you think about it, 2 of those are going to be lands. Right. And you've already got 7 mana of, including all these colored mana symbols. So, lands are not super important here. And so now you're down to 3 cards maybe that, and if they're permanents, you get to cast them for free and put them on the battlefield or whatever. And if they're not, you're just drawing them. Like, that does not hold up given what we have to put up to do this. Right.
Right. So
can we put this one at the bottom?
I think Genesis Ultimatum is actually the worst. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm updating
Emergent's
our power
also
rankings.
pretty bad. Sure.
Mm-hmm.
So this deck ends up, I think, being a little more aggressive than some of these other 3-color pairs because it wants to push the blue-green mutate that really plays to the board. And I found that mutate in general plays a lot better if you're proactive and you're the one who's ahead, because what you don't want to end up doing is, first of all, mutate and not attack, because that's always disappointing. Right. But second, if you mutate and they have three creatures and you have one huge creature and they go Pacifism or Blood Curdle or whatever it is they do, you don't want to be left holding the bag and super behind on board. So I have found a lot more success if you're the person with Frost Lynxes and Essence Symbiotes and you're the one who's kind of pushing the aggression. And then even if they deal with something at that point, you end up in a spot where you have time to recover. And mutate does do a decent job of keeping you up on cards. A lot of the mutate triggers kind of give you a card. So I like the blue-green mutate decks, and the key commons are besides, stuff like Fire Prophecy, which if you can cast it is always just the best or whatever. Frostlinks, Farfinder, Migratory Greathorn, Dreamtail Heron, Fertilite if you're trying to get funky with splashes. And this is the deck that can really use Auspicious Starix and Archipelagore and Parcel Beast, the really good uncommon payoff, the best.
Yes.
So that's kind of where I like ending up with this deck. And when you do splash, it's usually for good mutates or Fire Prophecies or gold cards of some kind. This is the deck that is most focused, I think. Like even the Sultai deck, when it's black, green, splash, blue, it can be a little bit more mixed. This is mostly the blue-green deck with just a couple red cards. And honestly, we're including this because of the Ultimatum, but the Ultimatum is barely worth it. So I feel kind of bad because Temur's not actually that great. Like,
well, then it kind of like, I mean, we're using them as signpost ultimatums, right? So maybe, it's just telling us the truth here.
Yeah, that's the sign.
Yeah, the sign is maybe not the best.
So, yeah, and Temur basically, there are certain, tricolor cards that can kind of lead you there, I guess. But even the Apexes really can let you play it as a two-color option. So
yeah, if you want to mutate. Mm-hmm.
I'm not super high on Temur. I do like the next one, though. I do like Abzan quite a bit.
Same. Yeah, let's talk about Abzan.
Abzan has Eerie Ultimatum. So this is black, 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 white, white, green, green. And it lets you put one of each permanent from your graveyard onto the battlefield. So what you can do is you can put every permanent from your graveyard to the battlefield, but if you have a card where there's multiples, you only get one of.
Yeah.
So
yeah, they have to have different names. That's the convention. Yes. Yep. Mm-hmm.
And what Eerie Ultimatum does, this is, I think, my favorite ultimatum to build around. Because, sure, casting Inspired Ultimatum is powerful, and casting Ruinous Ultimatum you usually win the game. Eerie Ultimatum, it actually gives you some really good synergy picks with it. So the first thing when you have Eerie Ultimatum is you are by far wanting to be the control deck. You really want to chump block. You want to buy time. You want to sacrifice creatures for benefit. You want to self mill. So cards like Excavation Mole and Corpse Churn get a lot better. Cards that sack and reuse are also really good. Stuff like Sleeper Dart and Springjaw Trap actually go up in value because first of all, Sleeper Dart and Springjaw Trap both keep you alive a little longer. They're removal spells or temporary ones in the case of Dart. But then when you get it back, you get another card. You get to slow down their creature for another turn. It actually works out really well. And I think that you're going to be pretty happy when you take a more defensive route in order to really get these cards going. So I do really like Eerie Ultimatum. I think that it's definitely worth building around, and you can, because you're green base, you can usually figure out the mana and kind of like Sultai, you're actually black green base most of the time. Like you usually are not like white green splash black or anything like that.
Yeah, to me the design on Eerie Ultimatum is the best of the five because Ruinous, I like the cleanliness of the design, but it also just does what it does. And it's like, okay, I can understand that that's obscenely powerful and just be good.
Right.
And Inspired is similar in the sense that it's just like, okay, cool. You covered my bases. I like the fact that it does such a great job of keeping you alive. And then you get the payoff of actually having the mana to spend all the cards. That's a nice one too. But this one, it makes you work for it just enough. But it also has, it has the highest ceiling, I guess. I mean, this is one that you could just, do the most obscene stuff.
15 permanents into
play. Exactly. And it feels really good, when you get to go through and go click, 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 or start grabbing them out of your graveyard. Because it makes you work for it a little bit, but not enough so that you're going, well, this is just too conditional and I can't imagine doing this. It's like, in a cycling set, Eerie Ultimatum's just perfect, right? It's just, you're cycling your sandworms and your stuff and your other creatures. You're trading off creatures on the ground, and you get 4, 5, 6 back and the game's over. Love it. The one thing that I do miss a little bit in the sense that it is in this set is that it's alongside Mutate, and Mutate has basically taken the place of enters the battlefield effects for most creatures. So you don't get that big, like, all my creatures come back and like one taps the thing down and one draws a card and one does a thing. Not that there's zero. There are some. You've got Blitz Leeches. You've got, you're not going to run Frostlinks in this deck, but there are cards that have ETB effects, so it's not completely gone. But I could imagine in a air quotes normal set like one without mutate, it could be obscene, right? Where you get all these extra triggers as well. But even as it stands, the card is really powerful and fun to build towards for sure.
Yeah, I mean, well, since you mentioned it, Blitzleech is actually a card I want in these decks because it's slow, but it does the exact kind of thing that you're looking for. And yes. I'm a pretty big fan of using Blitzleech in order to get more value out of Ultimatum and just to just be a powerful card in general in a deck that's conditioned to play a slow game. Another note on the Ultimatum is don't worry too much about multiples. Like, your third grader Sandworm has a lot less value because part of the joke with the Sandworm is that you cycle it and it comes back. Mm-hmm. But for the most part, we're not talking about a companion here. You can just draft kind of as if you were just drafting, and the Ultimatum's still generally going to be good. Yeah,
that's a really good point. It's easy to focus too much on the one really powerful card you have, like the Ikoria Ultimatum, but you can just put this into a deck and it'll just be really good.
Yeah. So as far as key commons for this deck and pick orders, you in general want to take Blood Curdle very high. Blood Curdle is just a fantastic card. The mana fixing is important, just like any deck that's trying to play all these different colors. And you have stuff like permanent base removal, like Dead Weight it's a little bit better, but again, Dead Weight is not maybe as good as it is in other sets. It's still very good though. It's I'm still happy with it. Mm-hmm. And then there's the whole mutate thing, which this deck can definitely run the mutate kind of aspect. It doesn't always though, and this is the deck I think that you're a little less likely to want it because you just want good defensive plays, and that's not really what mutate provides. Mutate tends not to be that. So I like being able to have mutate as an option. Like, sure, you're going to take the good mutate cards no matter what, but you're not really focused on really making mutate go. So something like an Essence Symbiote is not something I would pick nearly as high in this world or in this deck as I would in something like Temur or even Sultai. Yeah,
for sure. Final power rankings. I have Ruinous number 1, and then Eerie and Inspired are really close. Like I have them on the same tier. And then Emergent, and then Genesis.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that I have Emergent slightly above Genesis, also because that color combination is just better. That helps too. And then I certainly think you got to have Ruinous in the front. And the Ultimatums are fun. They actually are pretty good. They did a better job on this cycle, I think, in terms of making them fun / interesting / playable compared to original Shards of Alara, where I would say most of the Ultimatums sucked because like a lot of them just weren't even good.
Yep.
Cruel is actually really the only good one. I guess there's the Naya Ultimatum. Titanic was also pretty good, +5/+5.
That was like your whole team. Super Overrun or whatever.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But for the most part, the Ultimatums weren't good and the mana wasn't good. Whereas here, the Ultimatums are good and the mana is actually there.
Yeah, it is really cool because it does feel like slots like the ones that the Ultimatums sit in are usually throwaways for limited. You just skip over them, but they're so tempting, right? Like you said, like first picking an Ultimatum and being like, we're going to do it. In Shards of Alara felt like folly, but you did it anyway because it was so sweet if you got to fire off a Cruel Ultimatum on somebody in limited, right? And now we have these ones, and I'm really grateful that they took the time just to make sure that these were in the set where they had really let the reins off with fixing. I think that decision is going to end up being really good, even though I totally recognize that like when you're designing a limited set, it's not like, well, how are we going to fit these Ultimatums in here? It's a little minor benefit that they've added on, but I'm glad they did so. So one thing I wanted to hit up before we take off here, Luis, is so look, we've advocated for these decks now and said that you can play them, particularly ones that have green in them, or make it almost easy to cast Ultimatums, or be able to cast, even if you don't have the actual Ultimatum, to be able to play like a full 3-color deck, and not have to worry about the mana. But are you worried if you sleeve up one of these things against cycling and against some of the other decks like Black-White Humans or things that you see there? Because look, as much as the mana is there, these decks can still be clunky and they can still miss their mana sometimes.
Well, I mean, there's part of the reason that we put that Fire Prophecy was a key comment or passivism and almost all the decks that can cast them, is that cheap removal always goes really well with expensive, powerful cards. That's just a tale as old as time. So being able to balance the number of good 6s and 7s versus the number of Fire Prophecies you have in your deck is very important. So you do have to kind of watch for that.
Yeah.
In general, I think that these decks, when you have a good configuration, these decks can be really, really good, even against aggressive decks. Cycling is just kind of its own thing, where
Agreed.
The cycling deck is just obscenely powerful for really unknown reasons, and that's just where it is. So
yeah.
I wouldn't stress too much about not being able to compete with the cycling deck. Like, yes, no one's ever going to beat the double Zenith Flare cycling deck, but that really shouldn't be the bar that you're trying to hit either.
Yeah. So one other point that I wanted to make about these 3-color decks, particularly the ones that have ramp elements in them, conceptually. So when you sit down to build your deck, and of course, while you're in the process of drafting it or picking the cards from your sealed deck to play in it, are that there are some fundamentals that get shifted around a little bit. So one of them is what Luis just hit on, which is that your removal, the cheap removal becomes quite important because you need to make sure that you don't get ran over by the first 1 to 3 plays that your opponent makes. Okay, so you need to be able to handle those cards. That's good. You need the big powerful payoffs. Right? You need the other end of the spectrum. You want to have an ultimatum. You want to have an apex or something big to put your mana into, or a mana sink that you can repeatedly put mana into for value. Something along those lines is going to need to be there. To fill out the middle, normally in a limited deck, a mid-range limited deck or even a controlling one, you would have a curve of creatures, right? And these would be there to block and maybe attack if you had the right curve and that kind of thing. And while that is still the case somewhat, you need to reserve slots for fixing. So some type of ramp and or fixing, depending on which configuration of colors that you end up being in, and also card draw. It is really important that you cover that base when you build particularly the ramp versions of these decks, because if you do not, you will have games where you ramp into nothing. And I'll tell you what, if you put, let's say, excavation mole or whatever, just some dirt, a bristling boar or something like that into your deck. And you're thinking like, this is a fine card, right? It's okay. I'll put it in my deck. And you draw that after you've kind of set up your mana instead of a card like Dark Bargain or a blue card draw spell or something like that. You are much worse off than you would be had you just played the card draw spell. And that's counterintuitive because generally on the show, we'll nudge you towards playing things that affect the board more often and kind of having a careful balance with the things that don't. But here, the interactive stuff gets shoved to the edges where you've got the early game fixing and removal, and then the late game is so powerful ideally that you don't have to fill it in with a bunch of durdles in the middle because you're just going to go way over the top of your opponent. You're going to be casting multicolored 6-drops when they're casting a 4-drop. You know what you don't care about? Your opponent's bristle boar or whatever when you're casting your apex on turn 5, right? And so you need to conceptually try to get that into your head where these sort of vanilla-ish middle ground creatures go down a lot in value in these decks, and your creature curve isn't quite as important as having all the pieces in place to make sure that you've got the ingredients to make this beautiful, beautiful pie that you're about to throw at your opponent's face. Anything else before we sign off here, Luis?
I do think that this format is an interesting spot where we've talked enough about cycling and how good it is or whatever. We don't really need to cover that more. But there's a lot of decks in this format, and I think that one of the things this format does reward is knowing how to draft these different decks. Over the next couple of weeks, we're gonna do deeper dives into them. We covered a bunch today, but there's still white black humans, black red sacrifice, blue red like a more aggressive blue red spells deck, that sort of thing. And those decks actually are quite effective. So I think this format is more open than it might seem, though it does suffer from the fact that that cycling is just this like huge kind of like looming cloud over it. So
yeah, there's a red white elephant in the room.
It's a weird kind of setup, but it is what it is.
Yeah, and like you said, we've talked about the cycling deck quite a bit, but we will continue to as well. I mean, it really is a big question mark over the set now on stretching the limits of the self-correcting nature of draft. It just is right now pushing that boundary, and we're going to see if in a month the cycling deck is just another deck that you can draft, or if it just continues to be this thing where you're like, every time I play this deck, I'm like, oh God, I just don't want to play this game out anymore. Like, I know how this goes. I know I can't really interact with it meaningfully. I know that their deck's more consistent than mine and in some ways more powerful. And you just have to slog through it. That's not good, right? So that's the thing that I want to keep an eye on, because we have had some pretty powerful, week 1 or week 2 archetypes before. But, they usually do kind of, by the end of the format, that's not what you're talking about anymore, and I'm curious to see if that happens here. All right, let's call it a show there, Luis. If you want to find us on social media, I'm Marshall_LR and Luis is LSV. You can find everything related to this podcast at lrcast.com. They've got all the episodes of the show ever up there, as well as links on the front page to all of our stuff, Luis's stream. And, there's a Facebook page, if you're on Facebook a lot, where I just post when the show goes up. So if you like getting notified through that, you can join that. The LRcast subreddit, where many of our great listeners go there to discuss Limited, talk about picks and do all that kind of stuff. Tons of stuff on the front there, and you can find all of it. I want to remind you that Channel Fireball is back in business, baby. If you want to put some orders in, you can sell some stuff via the buy list. You can buy stuff, start using up store credit, whatever it is that you want to do. They're going to be able to start fulfilling orders now. They're under a little bit of a restriction because, they have to do it in a safe, controlled way, given the restrictions that are here. So we do ask for a little patience there. But the cool news is that the doors are back open. They're taking orders, and you can head on over to Channel Fireball. While you're there, you can check out CFB Pro. That's the new content service over there, where you'll get access to numerous new articles from some of the best when it comes to creating stuff. Videos still free. You can watch those all you want. And but you can check out the information on CFB Pro, which will also be in the show notes. Thanks so much for listening. We'll talk to you next week.
So I've been on a quest to kind of refine one of my skills, Marshall, and it's one that you won't be surprised to learn about.
Okay, which of your many skills are you refining today?
I'm trying to figure out the best recipe to make jalapeno poppers.
Oh God, yes, please do this.
Yeah, so I've made 3 different trials right now, and I'm going to walk you through my misadventures. The first one is I cut the top off and tried to use a spoon and a fork to get the seeds and kind of stuff the ridges and stuff out from the middle. Mm-hmm. But it was okay, but I kind of mauled the peppers a little bit. It was hard to cut the sides and then do that and scrape everything out. Mm-hmm. And then I used string cheese because that was kind of the shape of the jalapenos.
Okay.
And then resealed it, put the top back on, wrapped it in bacon, and used toothpicks to get it going. Okay. It was okay. I used the grill. I put it on the grill till the bacon was done, and it was okay. So a couple notes from that particular one. The peppers didn't cook long enough, but the cheese cooks a lot faster than everything else. Mm-hmm. So that's certainly undesirable. Also, string cheese just wasn't the best. I could do better with that. Right.
Okay. Yeah.
So for version 2, I took jalapeno peppers, cut them in half, lengthwise, if you put a knife kind of perpendicular and you cut it from the long way.
But just on one edge? Or did you split them in two?
All the way through. It's kind of like you bisect them. Scooped everything out. That was a lot easier because it was open. And then stuffed it with shredded cheese and then wrapped it. Actually learned some technology, but first too, you grill the pepper by itself for a little while with just a tiny bit of olive oil for a couple minutes, because the pepper takes a long time to soften up. So you grill that for a couple minutes. That way, so it's not done yet, but that way when you grill it later, it gets done at the right speed.
Mm-hmm. And which cheese did you said shredded cheese? What kind?
Shredded Mexican blend cheese. Okay. The cheddar Monterey Jack blend.
Yep.
Wrapped it, toothpicks. Those came out pretty well. I'm excited to try version 3 today, which is I'm gonna cut it the same way. I'm still gonna pre-grill the peppers, but I'm gonna use cream cheese this time instead of shredded cheese, because I think that'll hold up better and won't leak out quite as much.
Yeah.
But I think that's where I'm gonna end up. these have been a good little snack, a good little appetizer. You know, we're grilling and all that. But yeah, they've been fun to make.
I like that. That's great. And I think cream cheese is going to be your best shot. The best ones I've had use cream cheese. But the weird thing is, I don't know if you can control this much, but there was one time when I ordered them from a restaurant and they were like obscenely spicy. Like, you know, jalapenos, when you take out the middles, aren't actually that hot. You know, I've eaten them a ton of times. And I mean, this was like 2 hours later, I still felt it. Like it was, I don't know if it's just like, you know, they forgot to take the seeds out or it didn't do it, but I'm going to advise you to avoid serving things that hot. Like I was sweating off of jalapenos and I like spicy food. So
yeah, that sounds a little rough.
Don't do that.